Okay, thanks again, everyone. This is Ryan Crodel at ValenceCell, and it looks like we've still got quite a few people joining, but in the interest of time, we've got a lot of information to cover, so I want to go ahead and get started. Before we dive right in, a few housekeeping items. If you have questions or any topics you want us to dive deeper on, please do submit those through the GoToWebinar control panel. We like to keep these as interactive as possible. So we will answer those questions as they come up throughout the session here. And then we've also got some time towards the end to answer any questions we may not have been able to cover throughout the course of the presentation. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, one of the first questions we always get is, will the slides in this material be made available after the webinar? And the answer to those questions are yes. We will make both. We are recording this webinar, and we will make the recording and the slides available to anyone and everyone who is registered for this webinar following the webinar. And we encourage you to share that with any of your colleagues or anyone else you think might be interested in this topic who may not have been able to make it here today. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. We are very pleased to have with us here this morning Dr. Stephen LaBeouf. Dr. LaBeouf is not only one of the co-founders and the president here at ValenceCell, but he is also the executive sponsor of ValenceCell's blood pressure technology endeavors, which you will hear a lot more about today. So with that, I will go ahead and hand over to Dr. LaBeouf and let him take over from here.
All right, thank you much for that intro. Y'all, thanks for y'all's time. I much appreciate it. I am very eager to talk with y'all about our calibration-free blood pressure monitoring technology using biometric earbuds. And as Ryan discussed, we really were very excited when we got our abstract accepted for the World Congress of Cardiology. But of course, mean COVID-19 put a damper on that and prevented us from presenting there, and the event was canceled. So we decided to present this information to you virtually and try and replicate that environment here through our virtual connection. So I'm going to start by speaking about the outline, what I'm going to go through today. So the agenda includes the background of our blood pressure development technology, how we went about developing it. We also go through why the ear as opposed to other form factors. Then we'll go through the clinical study, the overview and results. We'll then go have a discussion about continuous BP monitoring with this technology. We will then talk about use cases, the variety of different use cases for this technology. We'll talk about two very broad use cases there, and we're looking for partners to help us get these use cases into the marketplace. And then where are we going from here? This presentation is very much about what we have, or at least what we had as of the submission of the abstract back in 2019. We've gone beyond that already, and where are we going from here with the technology? And then lastly, a lot of folks want to know how to evaluate the technology, and we are very well equipped to do that for you, and we'll explain how you can have access to that technology. So first, let's talk about the background. It's well known, not just in the United States, but worldwide, that hypertension is a significant public health issue. And the CDC, for example, has estimated that in the United States, hypertension in 2014 was the primary or a contributing cause to death in over 400,000 folks, and that's only risen over the years. And a third of American adults are estimated to have hypertension, but only half of them know that they have the disease. Now, the World Health Organization calls hypertension the silent killer, because you don't know you have it when you have it until it's too late, which is the worst thing about it. But it's estimated to cause over 7 million deaths per year worldwide. So that's roughly almost 13% of all deaths worldwide. Now, it's known that combining prevention with regular BP monitoring can improve health and reduce the risk of heart attack or stroke. However, few households own a BP monitor, and even fewer comply with regular monitoring due to the difficulties of properly using and donning a BP cuff. It is just, using a BP cuff for a regular person, using it the right way is not the easiest thing to do. I've seen many a time where doctors and even nurses have not even properly donned a BP cuff or worn it correctly for doing measurements. And so you can imagine it's more of a challenge for those who are consumers in the end. And now you might see some references there in the bottom of this slide. Those will be available for you, and you can take a deeper dive into the rationale behind these references. But what I'd like to do now is the motivation for why ValenceCell decided to investigate this area, to make a cuffless technology for being able to, without a calibration, monitor blood pressure. What I'd like to do is give you an overview of our historical timeline on this. So we started working on this blood pressure technology all the way back in 2009. And it was very low level. It was an investigatory aspect here because we developed this in-ear monitoring technology, which involved auscultatory analysis, optical analysis, inertial analysis, electrodes, pretty much anything you can imagine you could shove into an ear. We evaluated this. And one of the investigations was, could we use PPG as a methodology for estimating blood pressure? And so we kicked that off, and we completed our summary of that sometime around 2011. And we said, this really is feasible. It's something that can be done. We realized it would require machine learning in order to get there. In 2014, we were able to raise some funds to continue this research because it was really just a small effort in all the other things we had to do. And frankly, no one gave a damn about it. At the time, you might remember in 2009, there weren't really any wearables around at the time. And the wearable market didn't start until maybe 2008, at least as we know it today. About 2009, there was hardly anything in the marketplace. So people just were having a hard time even understanding how do you integrate heart rate into a wearable device, much less blood pressure. So we filed our foundational patent on this in 2014. And since then, several patents have been granted based off that foundational filing. And in 2016, we got some funding, and we were able to collect data from a smaller group of folks, but it was a larger effort, and we collected group data from about 100, just under 100 folks at that time. We started developing our model, and we realized that we needed a whole lot more data, and data is expensive. There are no databases that you can go to that comprise raw PPG data from a wearable device and combine that with blood pressure cuff data. There is a database that combines PPG data from a pulse oximeter with data from an arterial line, but that data is notoriously noisy and just not very usable for this application at hand. And so we had to develop that database. And in 2018, we raised some additional funds and also collected a lot more data. And by 2019, we collected over 15,000 data sets on many different parts of the body. And we demonstrated that we could track blood pressure like a cuff. And so now in 2020, we're focused on launching with partners a adrenal wellness device and pursuing medical device partnerships. You see, ValenceCell, as many of y'all know, we don't make blood pressure monitors. We don't make wearable devices. We make technology that goes into them. And so we license to companies. We provide solutions to companies and sensor modules, either through ourselves or through distribution partners. We don't never plan to make our own end products ourselves, as far as end products that you would use or wear. So we provide software solutions, we provide hardware solutions, but they go into that. So we rely on partners who want to put our technology into their products. So now that I've given you that overview of how we got here at ValenceCell, I'd like to discuss why we picked the ear. You know that I mentioned that we collected 15,000 data sets. I want to say by the time we put this together, we had 5,000 ear data sets, 3,000 of which were usable for this particular endeavor. And the ear is good because it's one of the best locations on the body for accurately measuring blood pressure via PPG. And I'll explain why we believe that is. The first is the ear has a very optimal vascular structure. The ear comprises this high density of arterioles, which connect between the arteries and the capillaries, and they kind of blow up like balloons when they do this. And so you can imagine that amplifying that pressure signal that gets there. And it's a high density in the ear of these with respect to other vascular structures, such as capillaries, venules, and veins. And so you really get a nice amplification of that blood pressure waveform. And now also, the ear's a fixed distance from the heart. And if any of y'all have ever used blood pressure monitors before or developed them, you know it's really important to have that monitor on the arm near the brachial artery at the right distance with respect to the heart. And it's a common problem and mistake people make, and you can really screw up the measurement big time if you don't keep that distance stable. On the ear, you don't have that to worry about. Unless you really lean over too much, there's really no difference there that you'll see. I mean, in order to shrink that difference between the ear and the heart, you would have to basically destroy your spine, which would lead in death, and we don't recommend that. That's definitely not the right way to do a measurement. So the ear is just very stable on that position there between the ear and the heart, and that definitely helps. The next thing is blood perfusion. It's well known that perfusion in the face and in the ear is much higher than other parts of the body. I don't know if you've ever accidentally cut your ear before. I've had many being from South Louisiana, many a zealous barber cut my hair and snip my ear, and that just feels like it's never going to stop bleeding. In contrast, if you scratch yourself on the wrist, it clogs up right away. There's just a lot more blood perfusion at the ear with respect than there is in other parts of the body, and that definitely helps. And lastly, another reason why the ear is so good is I don't know of any other part of the body where you can measure so much stuff at one spot. I mean, it's the ear or the rear. And the rear is probably not nearly as comfortable as the ear, because in the ear you can measure heart rate, you can measure, we've shown now you can measure blood pressure, core body temperature, breathing rate, body sounds or sculptatory sounds. All these can be monitored at the ear, and you just can't measure all these things at the wrist or other locations on the body. So all these things together are one of the reasons, or explain why the ear was so interesting to us. And indeed, when we looked at all the data, the ear data was better than any of the other data we collected. Even though finger PPG waves look pretty awesome, I gotta say, the ear has more pressure information in it. And these are the technical reasons why the ear is so awesome for this. But there's also some market reasons why. And as some of you may know, there have been several reports on this. IDC perhaps has been spearheading this, is that the wearables market today is dominated by hearables. A lot of folks don't know this. You think of wearables, you think of wrist-worn devices, but the reality is already hearables topple that of wearables. And the growth in hearables is higher than the rest of the wearables category. So it's the biggest segment and the fastest individual growing segment, at least when you compare it to wrist-worn devices. And the bottom line is, when you're hitting a moving target and more people are wearing these ear-worn devices, these true wireless earbuds, and also hearing aids, then you get to see how this really can have just a tremendous public health impact and a tremendous market impact too. So what I'd like to do now is go through the...
There's a few questions that have come in, if I can interrupt real quick.
Oh, no worry.
So on the previous slide, you talked about the ear being a fixed distance from the heart. There's a question here about why that's important. Is it relevant to the movement, or is it related to the movement component?
Well, that's a great question. The reason why it's important is because if you, for example, if you had a blood pressure cuff on your arm and you raised your arm up high, you would actually have less pressure going to that arm. And the thing is, what you're trying to do with the brachial measurement is you're really trying to estimate the pressure of the heart. And when you raise your arm there, you really distance yourself from it. So if you raise your arm, you might get a 20 millimeter of mercury difference from what it would be if your arm were at heart level. So by having that fixed distance, you prevent any of the anomalies that could be associated with trying to model the heart's pressure against the ear. Or because, if you could change that distance between the ear and the heart accidentally somehow, then when you're trying to develop these machine learning models, you have to factor for that. And that's a hard thing to factor for.
Cool. So a few other questions. It looks like we will get to most of this in later slides, one of which is please comment on compliance to ISO 81060-2. which I know you'll cover later, so we'll put that one to the side for a moment. Another question is, have you tried pectoral chest areas to see how accurate your measurement is there?
So on the pectoral chest area, we haven't done blood pressure measurements. Well, it's not true, we've done a few, but not enough to be meaningful. We've done a number of PPG measurements there so that we can demonstrate the ability to measure motion tolerant heart rate and breathing rate, and then also heart rate variability, our interval, for example, but not blood pressure. By far, most of our data sets that we have an equal number of data sets on the ear and on the finger. And on the ear, we have data sets that comprise in the ear canal and data sets that comprise in the concha. And then also, we have a number of data sets on the wrist as well, but not nearly as many as we have on the finger and the ear. But we have very few in other parts of the body.
Yep. Okay. And then it looks like there's another question about, will the webinar be recorded? For those of you who missed it up front, yes, this is being recorded, and we'll distribute the recording and a link to the slides out later after the webinar. So thanks for that.
Ryan, are you going to transcribe this presentation from Cajun English into American and British English?
We will do our best for that, yes.
All right, so I know there's some other questions, and we'll get to those in a bit with this presentation. So what I'd like to do is move over to the meat of this presentation, which focuses first with the abstract that we were to present at the American College of Cardiology event in April, actually right now. So we have everything organized here in this one slide, showcasing everything, a snapshot. And this is somewhat of an eyesore for you to go through. So what we've done is we've broken this up into slides that are more visually appealing. So everything you see here, we're going to talk about in a way where it won't strain your eyes. And the key takeaway of this presentation is that we've shown that a biometric audio earbud can accurately monitor blood pressure during free living conditions without the need for a cuff. And the next few slides I go through really are going to explain that. And since we've already gone through the background already, what I'd like to do is start with the methods. So our approach, it comprised a machine learning algorithm applied to 15,000 data sets from 5,000 subjects. So we collected all this data and processed it, and a lot of the data was unusable. And so we processed all this data, massive data collection, both in the United States and abroad in Asia, Vietnam, and the Philippines to be exact. We then built our model around all this training data we had developed. And in folks, we had multiple measurements from multiple folks. So for example, in that 5,000 subjects, some people had been tested 3 or 4 or 5, or even in some cases 6 times. And we developed this machine learning model to connect the dots between the PPG inputs and the blood pressure. And the inputs to the model, and I'll show more about this in a bit, the inputs to this model included raw PPG data, inertial data from our PPG sensor, and then additionally certain metadata. For example, especially the person's age and the person's weight and gender were really important also to help getting to meet the ISO requirements. So then we did this, we built this data set up, but you can't use that same data set to prove to yourself that your model works. There's some things you can do as you data scientists know. For example, leave one out, which is a non-biased way to do an assessment, but you never ever really know how well your model really works unless you test it on a true unadulterated data set that has never ever in any way been used to build the model. So we had to do this. So we adopted the ISO 8160-2 2018 protocol for oscillometric cuffs to gauge how well an oscillometric cuff would perform against a manual cuff. And in this case, we hired some nurses to come to our facility. They collected data and recruited folks from all over to be participants in this new data set. Now, this data set is interesting. You see, when we developed the training here, the training model was done where people would come to a mall with a booth there. We had malls across North Carolina, or they would come to a facility in Vietnam or the Philippines, and there would be a trained specialist who could measure their blood pressure through the auscultatory methodology, through the sphygmomanometer that was there, and that was the ground truth. They also took a measurement simultaneously of an oscillometric cuff on the opposing arm. And then they took a measurement on the ear. And that was done in the training. In the ISO protocol, it's more complex. The people come in and there are multiple auscultatory measurements done, multiple oscillometric measurements done, and multiple ear measurements done. And it was all done according to that protocol. And it's really strict. I mean, if somebody, for example, comes in and the blood pressure as measured by, it's 3 nurses, 2 of the nurses take individual measurements. There's an ear, they each have their own earpieces for the auscultatory analysis, and they're each measuring individually the blood pressure. And if they're off by 4 millimeters of mercury as determined by the 3rd nurse, so they write down on a sheet of paper what they measured, they send it to the 3rd nurse, the 3rd nurse reviews it and says, is this within 4 millimeters of mercury or not? And if it's not, you can't even use the data set. So it's a really strict protocol, but good. It was a really good way for us to judge how well we would do at passing an ISO test. And then after this was done, the thing about it is you have these models, but for them to be extremely useful, you'd like them to be an embedded solution inside a device rather than something where you have to go to the cloud and hope there's a connection that'll do the processing for you. So we developed an embedded solution that took everything we developed, all this software, and put it into our PerformTech biometric operating system. So this biometric operating system, it monitors your heart rate, it monitors your RR intervals, it does all kinds of calculations, it calculates your blood pressure. All these things are done in real time, and updates are given every second. And I want to talk a little bit about the embedded solution. I don't want to get too technical in this discussion about it because that's going to bore the hell out of everybody. But the way that this embedded software works is you have your inputs, which is your inertial data, your PPG data, and your static biometrics. And I mentioned again, the static biometrics are things like age, weight, and gender. And in the processing, the software has 2 components. And everything in here is autonomous. There's a qualifier and there's a BP estimator. And I'll explain what those do in a bit. And then from the BP estimator is the BP measurement that goes to the output. And there are many different ways to process the outputs that we provide app notes for and software for. The processing in the middle, the qualifying the BP estimator, let me talk a bit about that because it'll help you with the rest of this presentation. The qualifier is something we developed that will look at that input, those inputs coming in, and it will say, do I believe that I'm really going to get an accurate BP measurement from this data? If so, then it qualifies the data. And then we know that when we estimate a BP, the statistics are going to be consistent with that of a cuff. And we developed this, and it turns out that this is really important because in some cases you might get data where this person's not going to have an accurate measurement, and you don't want to give them an inaccurate measurement. You want to give ideally only accurate measurements. Now, no sense is perfect, of course, but this qualifier helps substantially with this issue, which can be observed with PPG and really any technology, but also with PPG is particularly important because remember now, we're not directly measuring blood pressure with this technology. We're measuring blood flow information and inertial information in the context of the static biometrics to estimate the blood pressure. So this is how the embedded software is basically the nuts and bolts of it. So what I'd like to do now is explain the training data and the qualified test data set data. So the training data is on the left and the qualified test data set is on the right. The training data set is the data that was used to build the model. And you can see there were about 2,600 tests and almost 1,700 unique participants that were used to build this model. You can see the breakdown of men to women and smokers to not. Some folks were on medication, some were not, most were not. You can see the breakdown of the age and the range. Here also the breakdown of systolic and diastolic readings used to build the model. All this stuff was done in the training data set as I described earlier at malls and facilities in Asia. In contrast, the qualified test data set was all collected using the ISO protocol. So this is the data where we had all the 3 nurses, for example, collecting the data and putting it all together. And this is the data, this summarizes the data, only the data that was qualified. So for example, if the qualifier said, I don't believe this is going to give a good, accurate result, that data was discarded. This is only where the automated qualifier said, I believe that this is going to give an accurate result. And so that's what this data set is. And it ended up being about 654 measures on 147 participants. And the breakdown of the different ranges is here. Interestingly enough, I had to double check this the other day. The qualified test data set was the exact swap of the gender using the training data set, and that was just a coincidence. So we had 39% male to 61% female in the qualified test data set, and it was swapped in the training data set. Kind of weird, but just how it turned out. So this qualified test data set, let me show you how we did compared to the auscultatory cuff, and also in context of the oscillometric auto cuff, because remember, we measured ear, we measured finger, we measured wrist, we measured the auscultatory cuff as the ground truth, and also used the oscillometric cuff as well. So this next plot shows the ear PPG and the auto cuff data, systolic on the left, diastolic on the right, with the manual reference, the auscultatory reference being the ground truth, and what our results are. So on the systolic, and if you look at the plots, the first thing that you'll notice is that the trends for the PPG and autocuff are essentially identical. I mean, you really have to, strain your eyes a bit, especially on the systolic side, to see any difference in the trend of how well the PPG did on the qualified test data set versus the autocuff. Another thing too is if you look at the bottom of each of these, you can see where I've summarized the statistics. Now, the ISO protocol, what it looks for is, in order to pass, you need to have a mean error no greater than 5 millimeters of mercury, and you need to have a standard deviation error, which is no greater than 8 millimeters of mercury. And we were able to achieve that on this qualified test data set for both the systolic and the diastolic. You'll note that on the systolic side, it looks like we did a little bit better than the autocuff. That is not true. This is not within the margin of error. 7.7 millimeters of mercury versus 8 in this particular case that small 0.3 is just, it's in the noise. We can't say we're better than a cuff. Now, if you look at the right here in the diastolic side, that 8 millimeters of mercury that we hit, that there definitely is the cuff is a little bit better in this case. It's 6.8 millimeters of mercury, and that's certainly a millimeter of mercury better, and that is significant. But still, we were able to hit the ISO requirements. So one of the things here in this data is that we wanted to say, okay, well, this is great. Can we use this as a way to gauge whether or not someone is hypertensive or not? And how well would we do that compared to an autocuff? So we said, well, the simplest way to do this is just to use the AHA standard, the American Heart Association standard, American Heart Association standard. And one of the standards they give is they say you're hypertensive if your systolic blood pressure is greater than or equal to 130 millimeters of mercury. And so we said, okay, well, let's look at the autocuff and how well it did at this versus PPG, and they're identical. Again, here it looks like we're a little bit better. That's not significant. If you did this another time, it might be swapped. I mean, this is all, the way to read this is they're the same. Both of these, both the cuff and the PPG on this qualified test data set, they were identical at being able to predict whether or not someone would be classified as hypertensive by using a very simple threshold of, are you greater than or equal to 130 millimeters of mercury in this test for the systolic blood pressure. So I want to talk about the qualified test data set more, because I mentioned that the qualifier rejects some data, and it rejects a good bit of data. And I want to explain more about how the qualifier works. So allow me to do that, please. So the qualified and unqualified data sets that you'll see are based off how the qualifier is tuned. So we tuned the qualifier. We found that we could tune our qualifier to just decide how confident did that software want to be in determining that your blood pressure was going to be extremely accurate with respect to a cuff. And when we're able to tune it to where it can say, do I believe that this person is going to be in a statistic of plus or minus 8? Do I believe that this measurement is going to be in a statistic of plus or minus 10 or higher? And when we did this, what we found was that we could tune the qualifier to do this. And so of all the data sets we collected, everything we collected, period, in that ISO test, everything. 60% of the data sets were deemed qualified. So in other words, the data I showed you was 60% of all the data we collected. That qualifier went through all the data and said, here's what I believe is going to be good cuff-like data. And it was right about that. It was certainly right about that. Now, if you be a little more liberal and you say, okay, well, for a general wellness application, and I should say that this is more than just general wellness. There's another ISO standard being investigated now where one of the ideas is maybe because of the fact that you don't need a cuff and that benefits there may be willingness to reduce the precision that's required. Or so in other words, be more lax on the precision to where the standard deviation may be within plus or minus 10 millimeters of mercury. So if we take that liberty now, we assume that that's useful for public health. I believe it is. You at least you don't need a cuff for this, and 70% of the data sets will be within plus or minus 10 millimeters of mercury for a standard deviation of plus or minus 10. So with that knowledge, if you tune the qualifier to plus or minus 10, 85% of the data sets are acceptable in that ISO data set. And that leaves 15% which aren't. So we went back and we looked through all of the data that was rejected by the qualifier. So there's 15% of data that was rejected as not being accurate enough. And it certainly wasn't. It was not accurate enough. And we looked at longitudinal data we had collected. So we looked at the longitudinal data we collected. We have several data sets where people have come in for a few weeks, in some cases months or longer, and saw, okay, how well would we do? We did an initial calibration of these folks. How well would we do? And we found that when we did that, these people, the stats for these people was plus or minus 10 millimeters of mercury. So what that means is, with what we have today, what I can say with 100% certainty today, what we have today, 85% of people who are tested, they're going to see that their statistics are within 5 plus or minus 10 millimeters of mercury. 15% are not going to get that, but with a one-time calibration, they will get that. And I feel really good about that, at least for 4 weeks of data on folks, because that's where the majority of our longitudinal data is. And so I feel really good about that today. If someone were to use this technology for a general wellness purpose, that is what you would get. Now, of course, through our R&D, we're continuing to improve via our R&D. We see improvements already. What I'm showing you is older data. We have an update coming out in Q2. But the reality is that our goal is to, frankly, get to where 95% of subjects can see calibration-free accuracy without a calibration at all. And you might say, well, why not 100%? It's because, I mean, I'm a scientist and I'm real about this. I don't know, I'm not aware of a single sensor in the world. I've looked at all of them. I've developed so many that gets 100% everybody. There's always going to be some issues, even an ECG on roughly about 5% of the population. You can't get a reliable reading either because of the left bundle block or other considerations. And so getting 95 is really a good, believable goal. And we believe we can get there, certainly the 90% and probably the 95% as well, with a calibration-free solution by PPG. But today, a product today can do these things. And because of the fact that our hardware is already set, the ear hardware is already set as it is, we can continue to provide firmware updates for improvement. Now, remember, what we were trying to do here was we were trying to do be as good as a cuff or as close to a cuff as possible for public health purposes. Our goal wasn't to make a continuous blood pressure monitor. That was not the goal. However, it turns out we can do that, and I'll show you some examples of this. So one of the series of tests that we did, and I just have one example here, is we said, okay, let's do some controlled breathing studies on folks and monitor their blood pressure and see how are we doing, in that study. And what we see is that we see exactly what you would expect to see. So in a healthy person, your blood pressure and your heart rate in controlled breathing should be 180 out of phase. And it's because the theory is that your body is trying to maintain cardiac output. And as you inhale, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes down. And as you exhale, your heart rate goes down and your blood pressure goes up. And this was important not only to see that we could truly track blood pressure with breathing, which we clearly can, and we've seen this time and time again, but also I needed to convince myself that we weren't tracking heart rate. And let me explain. You see, in the PPG signal, the strongest signal by far, when you're in a resting environment, the strongest signal is heart rate. And so the data science mentality, part of my brain here, says, well, wait a second now. What if heart rate is dominating these values? And that would not be good, because that would mean you have a model that's dependent on heart rate somehow. And so the fact that we see that the blood pressure is independent of heart rate was also refreshing to know that we really truly are tracking blood pressure. And we've seen that time and time again. Another thing we've done is we've done some exercise tests where we've done some isometric induction of increased blood pressure. Here's one example. This is typically what they look like. So this is a typical plot. It's not our best, it's not our worst, it's what you would typically see. You would see the x-axis here is time in seconds. The y-axis is blood pressure. And it's a number of things to note here. The red line is our software's estimation of the person's blood pressure, calibration free without a calibration. So here's what we think your blood pressure is on the systolic side, red line. The blue line here, that below it, is the diastolic estimation from PPG, again, not calibrated in any way. The pink dots are measured by the cuff, and the blue dots are measured by the cuff, the pink dots being systolic and the blue dots being diastolic. And the square wave that you see just shows when the person does the exercise. So the person it starts an exercise and the blood pressure goes up, and how well do we track with that? And we see that we certainly can. And we've done more work with this on this recently, a lot more work recently on this, because for different use cases, this can be really important. And speaking of use cases, what I'd like to do now is move on to discuss some of these use cases. So ValenceCell, one of the things, like I mentioned, we rely on partners to get our technology into the marketplace. And so what we've done is we spent some time thinking about how would you use this technology for a general wellness purpose versus a medical purpose. And so I'll show you what we've conceived of here. So in the case of general wellness, so it's focused in our minds on monitoring blood pressure using a biometric audio earbud. As of course, as we discussed earlier, the use of earbuds and smart earbuds and Bluetooth headsets and Bluetooth earbuds and AirPods and all kinds of things like this, it's proliferated now. There's a large group of consumers that are using these for exercise, listening to music, talking on the phone, a variety of things. And so if you start at the top left, you can see a situation where someone could put in the earbud and they get an update. They can get an update about how well they slept based off of their heart rate variability, for example, in that morning, and also get an update about what's suggested for them to do that day. And also, because we're able to track your blood pressure and your stress as you drive or whatever you're doing with the earbud, we can even recommend what's the lowest stress route for you, what we learn. We can then see if you appear to be stressed, we can recommend audibly a relaxation session. And there are several solutions available today in the consumer marketplace for doing this. There's a company called Headspace, is very popular for audio-visual based stress reduction. And then also Calm is another one. There's many others. And people really do like these. So with this technology, you can be alerted to this if we sense that you're more stressed. And not only that, you get to see the results of the impact of that. So how well did that session help you reduce your stress and your blood pressure? So that etiology between stress and blood pressure can be better explained for the person there. And so another thing here is perhaps someone needs to be relaxed and you could play a more relaxing track of music, and maybe you've learned this from how the music affects their blood pressure and their stress. Or for exercise, for example, you may recommend certain zones of heart rate exercise that are known to improve your blood pressure. And you can see the interaction between the diet and exercise choices you made and how well they've helped you reduce your blood pressure or keep it under control. And at the end of the day, you might look at your phone or look at some screen of whatever your choice, and then see a summary of what you've done. And then you may want to help relax yourself, and then you can execute stress reduction or stress or relaxation therapy through audio to reduce your blood pressure, and get to see how well by controlling your stress you can reduce your blood pressure, and then maybe get a better night's sleep. So this is kind of how a day in the life, different ways to look at how a general wellness blood pressure monitoring device might work. I feel that it's a great way to help people connect the exercise and lifestyle and diet choices they make with health improvements, or things that are generally well known to the public. Now, On the medical side, it's different. On the medical side, we see that we really would, the key here is to connect the person to a medical professional who can help them with managing their hypertension and in managing it with respect to diet and exercise, of course, but also potentially medication. And there's a few ways to do this. Our technology can be integrated into hearing aids, and it's currently been integrated into hearing aid components. And so for somebody in their daily living, we can track various different vital parameters, such as, in principle, heart rate variability, blood oxygenation, blood pressure, even body temp is possible in the ear. And you can do this assessment, and you can then, without the person even knowing this is happening a few times a day, but then provide an assessment that the doctor might be able to see. Maybe just let them know how well they're responding to whatever the therapy would be. Another use case, which is a little different than this free living use case, is and it's extremely important and valuable. We became aware of this issue from the VA a few years back, where there's a need to triage people when they come into a hospital, for example, and they may be sitting down waiting to get service. And if you can place an earpiece in them with some cover on top, of course, sanitary cover, which there's plenty of for earpieces today, and place this in their ear and do an assessment of the heart rate variability, blood oxygenation, blood pressure, body temp with this device, you can do some great triage and get a lot of information that can be useful in helping get them what they need sooner. And of course, now with the heightened public awareness of diseases and how it might prevent you from being able to be mobile to even get to a doctor for telehealth purposes, this kind of device that can measure all this in one spot and also audibly tell you how to do the tests could be really, really interesting for folks. So that's how we see it that's really how we see the use case on the medical side. And this is just some of what we have in mind. And we're looking for partners to help us to launch products in the general wellness side and the medical device side. So where are we going from here? The first thing is expanding data collection. A lot of the reason why the qualifier rejects so many measurements is because we believe, and we actually identified this, we know this is part of the problem, is holes in the data collection. So whenever you build a machine learning model, where the model is connecting the dots between all these parameters and the blood pressure, and there are some holes there. And in particular, people who suffer from extreme hypertension, we have less of in our model. And so we are currently building that database. Now, thank God we collected all the data we did so far, because it's much harder now to collect clinical trial data because of the coronavirus issue we're dealing with today. But of course, that will open back up again. We'll be able to get more data, but we've got plenty of data already. And frankly, we have another path that we're working on now for continual improvement with the massive data we already have. And as I mentioned, we've already seen improvements that we're just simply not reporting right now on the blood pressure side. And then lastly, another thing is other body locations, because we don't, when we say it's true that we have a lot of faith in the ear based off everything we've done and measured and also the science behind it, but we don't mean to put down any of the other form factors. As you know, ValenceCell, we have a lot of business in the wrist and the arm in our business. We provide solutions for the wrist and the arm and also the chest, frankly. And the reality is that we love those form factors. We don't think it's impossible to make this blood pressure monitoring technology work on these other form factors. We don't believe it's impossible. We just think you need a whole lot more data in order to make that work. And it's difficult and challenging to get those data sets. Those data sets are not easy to come by. And also the benchmarks used to collect that data aren't so hot. You really need somebody trained to get an accurate measurement from an auscultatory monitor. And then an oscillometric cuff isn't always so hot either. And many of y'all know, if you take more than 5 measurements a day on an oscillometric cuff, then every 6 months or so, you're supposed to take it back to the manufacturer to get it retuned, to get it recalibrated to a pressure source. So the benchmarks are not the easiest thing to use in building these models. So the last thing I'll talk about here is how to get access to the technology we have. We've made this now available. We have a BP evaluation kit. It's got 3 major components to it. It's got some hardware, software, and documentation. Now, the hardware has a wired earbud with embedded PPG in it. So all the calculations are done on this little chip that you can't see on this board. And this board is designed to be larger, just simply so you can test it. You can test your leads and see what the potentials are across the various different sides. It's a USB development board. It's a everything is processed. All the metrics are processed on this low power MCU that's on the board. The interface is a PC interface. So you plug the dev kit into the PC. There's some PC software that does all the calculations and shows you all the diagnostics. For example, what's the qualifier saying about the signal? What does the PPG wave look like? Have there been too many motion artifacts, for example? And do you need to reset a test? All that's done there in the software. And then the documentation that is provided helps guide you on how to use the dev kit. There's videos as well on how to use the dev kit, and also how you would go about building a device with this technology. The sensor inside that earbud you see on the left is a commercially available sensor, which makes it great for time to market for these solutions. And we also have test procedures we recommend in a validation white paper on how we did our testing for you in this kit. And these kits are available. You can get them from just going to ValenceCell's website. Ryan, at the end of the presentation, maybe you could remind folks what's the best email to use. It's probably, I'm guessing it's benchmark@valencell.com for them to get the information. But you can go to our website, and on the website get the information on how to get access to one of these evaluation kits. So in closing here, before opening up for Q&A, we've developed this calibration-free PPG-based BP technology. It demonstrates cuff-like performance without the cuff. We have followed the ISO 8160-2 protocol, the 2018 version, and the ear PPG blood pressure solution has demonstrated accuracy within the required limit for the qualified test data set. We believe the current solution is ready for commercialization in a general wellness product today. In parallel, regulatory efforts are underway to enable medical grade solutions as well, and also continuous R&D to improve what we're doing today. Now, although this isn't designed for continuous monitoring, it turns out it can do this, and it does it pretty well. And so you can also use this technology for continuous monitoring use cases. You know, originally what we envisioned was this technology would turn on every once in a while, take a measurement and turn off. But it turns out you can get good measurements every second from the device. So again, lastly, if you want an eval kit here, here's the website right here, info@valencell.com. And we are extremely excited to be able to work with you to get this out. And now I would like to say that I'm extremely eager to open it up for Q&A.
And we've got a lot of eager attendees as well. A bunch of questions have been coming in. Great questions, keep them coming. I've tried to, we've had several overlapping questions, so I've tried to categorize some of the main themes of the questions that are coming in. One of the big ones, of course, is the regulatory question of what would be required to go through a regulatory clearance process, and what would be acceptable under general wellness criteria. So LaBeouf, can you talk a little bit more about our perspective on where to draw that line and what those different use cases and scenarios might look like?
You bet. So we've had consultation on this from our own consultants and elsewhere. And let's talk about the general wellness use case first. There's a provision from the FDA for products that are used for general wellness purposes. It's a general wellness exemption. It used to be, I want to say it used to be called like a 503B, and you submitted that to the FDA. You no longer, that provision, my understanding, is no longer there to submit as a 503B. Rather, you don't make any medical claims, you launch as a general wellness device, and you only use it for general wellness purposes. And this means devices that are, I can't remember the FDA's exact language, but in general wellness means where it is generally known that exercise and diet and lifestyle changes can improve your health. And so for this case, the way you would use the technology would be, you could not launch this as a blood pressure monitor in this case. You would launch it as a device that can estimate your blood pressure for general wellness purposes, not intended for medical use. You could not launch that as a medical device. You would have to launch it as a general wellness solution. Now, on the regulatory side, where you want to make the medical claim that this is a blood pressure monitor and use it for whatever you want to use it for example, a blood pressure cuff equivalent, or you want to use it maybe for hypertension indication or whatever you would like to use it for, then the mechanisms are a 510K, or the mechanism could also be a de novo. And there's some other mechanisms you could use as well. Now, for software as a medical device, so if you wanted to launch this as a software solution, the limitation that we have at ValenceCell is, you see, we don't make the final product, and whoever makes the final product is the one who needs to get approval. So the way we've been helping out here is we executed the ISO test ourselves, and the purpose of that was to have that data set to prove to ourselves and to our partners that if they instituted, or they rather executed, an ISO test just like this, that they would be able to meet the ISO requirements. So we've been doing that ourselves. Also, we've been getting our certifications because the software we provide needs to be appropriately certified so that we can provide it to you. And so we've been through the process. We've got many of them already, and we've got, I think, a few I's to dot and T's to cross to be fully certified. So we're taking that upon ourselves. So providing all the data people need to get their own 510K equivalent to be substantially equivalent to a cuff. We're doing that at ValenceCell, and also the certifications we need to be able to be compliant with the software that is required to make this work.
Great. Several questions have come in related to the process of taking a BP measurement. One question that keeps coming up is, how long does it take to get one BP measurement with this technology?
Oh, a great question. I didn't mention that. So right now we take 30 seconds. You don't need 30 seconds. I'll tell you, you really need 6 seconds bare minimum. You really need 6 to get the first measurement, because you need to get enough PPG waves to make an estimate. The reason we picked 30 seconds is from the beginning, we envisioned we were going to go for a 510K on this with a cuff. And cuffs take about 30 seconds to go. And we had been instructed early on that the closer we can make this to how a cuff would measure, the better. And so, frankly, that's why we picked the 30 seconds. It doesn't need to be 30 seconds. 6 seconds will do, unless you've got bad PPG waves, in which case, of course, it'll take longer. But 6 seconds of waves will do to get you an inaccurate measurement. But right now, the software takes 30 seconds, and then after that 30 seconds, we update it every second.
Got it. And then a few questions came in around the discussion of the ear's static distance from the heart, and questions more around is the signal impacted by whether the person is sitting up or laying down?
Yes, it is. And so what we've seen is that, so I got to say, first of all, let me say this. We haven't done extensive studies on position and the blood pressure. What we have done is we've done some studies to see, does the blood pressure change the right way depending on what people are doing? So in other words, if somebody's pushing their feet against a wall or some kind of weight to build pressure in the body, do we see the blood pressure going up? And it does. We've said, okay, well, if somebody lays down, does the blood pressure go down? When they stand up, does the blood pressure go down, or does it go up? And we're seeing that is the case. The blood pressure is trending in the right relationship. So we feel good about that, at least to date. But I got to say, we haven't done. And if you wanted to test this for this and wanted to market it for this purpose, you would certainly need to do more testing on that than we've done. Our focus has been on making it meet equivalence to a cuff, like a cuff would be used, but without a cuff.
Got it. And a few questions on movement. Does it require the individual to be still?
Well, I'll tell you this. The short answer is no. The longer answer is they need to be still enough. So what you can't have is you can't have certain in the ear, for example. We've done tests on this already. If the person's wearing this on the ear and they're walking around and they're not moving their mouths or talking, you're going to get really accurate BP values, really very sensible values. But when you talk or if you run, the noise is too strong In ValenceCell, we are very skilled at removing motion noise, and we do this for heart rate and RI. We're probably the best in the world for this, frankly. At least that's what most people tell us that we work with. But for blood pressure, it's still hard because the information is so caught up in those PPG waves that you really need nice looking waves. And so on the ear, you can walk, you can move around as long as you're not running. Impact noise is bad, and also mouth motion noise is bad. If you use this technology on the finger, we have finger technology as well. It's just not as accurate as the ear. On the finger, you can't walk. You have to be really still on the finger to make it work. And part of it's because you have modulations and pressure on your finger as you move, and you just don't have those in an earbud or in a hearing aid.
Gotcha. Several questions have come in around the longitudinal data and does it continue to track over time? So I know you touched on that earlier, but can you expand on that a little bit?
Oh yeah. So with the longitudinal data, I see what you mean. And so the longitudinal. Oh man, I'm glad you asked this question because there's an important point that I forgot to mention. So please allow me to mention this. So to quickly answer the question, right now with confidence, I only have 4 weeks of data. We do have some folks that did go as much as a year away from measurement and they were fine, but it was only like 7 folks. It's just not enough statistical data. I've got hundreds of folks who've been tested at least 4 times over the course of 4 or 5 or 6 weeks. And we know that it holds up for that just fine. I can't really say beyond that, but this is another thing that's important to point out. So one other thing ValenceCell did is in the ISO test. Remember how I told you all there's 8 measurements you take in this test. Well, up to 8 measurements you can take, and we took all 8. And so we're just going to take all 8 measurements back to back. Might take a whole hour for this person, but we're going to take 8 measurements back to back with the auscultatory cuff, the oscillometric cuff, and the earbuds, and all the other sensors that are there. And so we did this. So if you take that data in that session, and you say that first data set, I'm going to make that the calibration. The statistics that you get are absurdly good, much better than any blood pressure cuff that I've ever seen. I mean, you get standard deviations around 6 millimeters of mercury. You get, mean errors that are extremely low. The problem is I don't see much public health use for that. And what I mean is in the ISO test, okay, in the ISO test, remember these people, they're sitting down very calmly the whole time, not moving at all. And another thing that the ISO requirement does is if your blood pressure changes by more than I want to say 12 millimeters of mercury systolic over the course of those measurements, you got to throw those data sets out. So the person's blood pressure ain't changing hardly at all. And so now if I'm going to say, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and judge myself by doing a calibration in this ISO test where the blood pressure is hardly changed, and you told me what the blood pressure is the first time, I'm going to calibrate it, and I do great, it's not really fair. So what we did is we didn't do that. We used longitudinal data sets where people came on separate days over the course of several weeks. And in that case, if you told me what the first blood pressure is, has no bearing on what the next blood pressure readings are for all practical purposes. They're on total separate days. And the person could come back from exercise. They could be hyped up one day, more on coffee one day versus the next, and you get to see that. And so that's what was the 6 millimeters of mercury from the ISO calibration was not nearly as interesting to me as the 10 millimeters of mercury longitudinally.
Speaking of calibration, there have been several questions that come in about what is the calibration protocol that we've used?
Oh, simple. In this particular case, everything I'm showing is extremely simple protocol. Literally, for what I've talked about today, it's only been an offset. And then we just keep applying that offset, and that's it. We have much more sophisticated calibration protocols. We have not gone public with how we're doing those yet, and we haven't made those available for folks yet. But this particular calibration was simply meant as a proof of concept to say, if you took a measurement on day 1 and you said, here's my offset, and you kept that offset all the way through the rest of however long that calibration lasts, which we know it doesn't change at all over at least a month, then you're good to go.
Gotcha. Also, quite a few questions on gender differences, given that hypertension tends to be more prevalent in males. Have we noticed any differences across genders or any differences either in the results and or in the waveforms across different genders?
Well, you know, one thing I would recommend y'all do here is we have a white paper online that you can download, and it has more information about this. And so what I'm telling you right now is from memory only, but I believe the white paper has the details people are looking for. But the reality is there is a slight trend where men have higher blood pressures than women. And there's also a slight trend where certain age ranges have higher blood pressures than others we've seen. And I'll tell you, from our data, it goes up for a while with age and then starts going down. And we've since checked this and seen that's consistent with what's known for the broader population of the planet. So we do see some of those trends. And I think the white paper has information about some of those, either directly or indirectly, in the documentation.
Got it. Question around the skin tone and skin pigmentation. Does that have any effect on the accuracy?
There's none at all. We haven't found any evidence whatsoever. We've looked at this every which way from Sunday. Now, I'll say this. The reality is that if you have darker skin, typically your PPG signals won't have as much intensity as someone who has lighter skin. That's not always the case because there's many factors that go into that. And frankly, perfusion is so much a bigger factor for what we do that skin tone is not much of an issue. But it's true, if everything else were the same, then someone with darker skin would have a lower signal, but still well within the range where we can measure the blood pressure. So we haven't seen an issue with that. Where we have seen issues is people where the perfusion is just really, really low. Or maybe they were wearing the earbud incorrectly, and the person who was managing the study didn't catch that, or they had it worn correctly, and then for whatever reason it popped out of their ear. That's the kind of thing we see. We really don't see any skin tone issues here at ValenceCell for that.
Got it. Okay. Those are the major themes of the questions. I know we're 5 minutes past the top of the hour, but LaBeouf, if you've still got time, we'll continue to go through these questions and get into some of the more granular questions.
Let's do it. This is how we do it.
Okay. Question, next one around, do you find more accuracy in the ear canal versus the concha placement?
Another awesome question. What I will say is that there's a lot I could say about this, but a lot that is I would consider to be confidential. But what I can say is that we haven't found any difference on the blood pressure waveforms in the inner ear versus the concha. And so today, the technology we have that works in the concha will work the same way, all things being equal, in the ear canal. The thing you have to be mindful of course, is you have more motion artifacts in the ear canal than you would have in the concha. And you would expect this. If you ever stuck your fingers in your ears, for example, and talk, you're going to feel a lot of motion there. And you just don't have that motion in the concha when you talk. I mean, you know, you can have our technology in the ear and talk and talk and talk for heart rate and not have an issue at all. And if you have our technology in the ear and talk and talk and talk, in some cases you'll get an error because we'll detect that we just can't accurately measure the blood pressure. So from the PPG wave perspective, the information content is the same as the ear canal versus the concha. As far as we can tell from everything we've looked at so far, and we've looked at it pretty extensively, they all look the same as far as measuring blood pressure. That is not true for the finger and wrist. Those signals do not have the same content.
Got it. Next question is, along with skin tone quality, any impacts on age or differences in results from an age standpoint?
There are, you know, on the white paper, we show the trend in our eras. So we also show the trend in our residuals and compare it to the trends in the residuals of the oscillometric cuff. And what's weird is we are less accurate at the extremes. So the lower your blood pressure and the higher your blood pressure, generally speaking, the less accurate we are. And that's true also for the oscillometric cuff in the study that we did, which is odd. I wasn't expecting that. And there definitely are some trends where certain ages are less accurate than others, and I can't remember exactly what they are because it's not linear. It's there's certain age ranges where we're more accurate than others, and then frankly, we believe it has to do more with the data support used to build the model.
Yeah. And you've referenced the white paper several times, and we've had a recommendation come through to send out a link to the white paper along with the recording of the webinar, and that's a great idea. We will do that, so everyone know where to get that straight away. Next question is on, does hypertension medication impact the estimation accuracy in any way?
Well, great question. And I tell you, we have seen that it appears that some medications have no effect at all. And this wasn't just by our testing. We've had partners evaluate our eval kits already. Other medications, it seems like they probably do. And we're not 100% certain if that's the case, because again, getting this is a statistical game we're playing here, and getting enough data to be certain is one thing. But I'll tell you that if you took out all the people, so if you look, remember how I said we have this qualified test data set where the qualifier says, I like you, and you measurement, but I don't like you, right? If you took every data set that came through in that ISO test, and you took out just everybody who was on medication, then the statistics for everybody, I believe, are better than 10 millimeters of mercury or thereabout. So without a calibration. So we know that that generally speaking, medication has some impact in the negative direction. But when you look at individual medications, some have no impact at all, and other medications look like they might. And part of that's because there's several medications for blood pressure, and they work in different ways. And as you can imagine, a medication that might affect that transfer function between the blood pressure and the blood flow could have an impact. And so in the future, one of the ways we can address this also is by filling in those gaps, frankly, with data collection. And that's one of the things we really need to do, because we know that every time we've been doing this for years, every time we fill a gap in data collection, it improves the model every time. So we need to do and find partners to help us collect more data on more different types of folks. But also, as a fix, additionally, you can do is have that be part of the model, where the medication someone is on is part of the model to improve the results.
Gotcha. Looks like several other themes are popping out here. One is a request to describe the sensor hardware in a little more detail and talk to the power consumption of the sensor hardware. So let's start with that.
All right, so that sensor hardware that you see there is from a BE 5.0. It's an ear sensor that has the capability of monitoring your heart rate, RR interval, and hence HRV, your activity parameters, so accelerometry, for example, cadence. It also can detect your activity status. So we have software from that sensor module that determines your activity status. For example, what activity are you doing? For example, there. Then additionally has the blood pressure estimation. It also has an output, a multi-wavelength output that can be used for SpO2 estimation. And we provide a little starter algorithm for you there. We have not done a medical evaluation of our SpO2. That's not what we're focused on, but we have put together a starter algorithm based off internal testing that you can build upon to improve the SpO2, and it's also motion tolerant. Additionally, we provide information in that sensor module. You can extract respiration rate and other respiration rate characteristics. It's all provided from that sensor module. It's the BE 5.0. Its power consumption at full blast is somewhere, I want to say, around 400 microamps of current at full blast. And so what you'll typically do for blood pressure is, you're not measuring continuously. You turn it on, you take a measurement, and you turn it off.
Yep, gotcha.
And if they want spec sheets on it, Ryan, that's another thing they should ask at info@valencell.com.
Yep, agreed. Another few questions have come in around, have we tested this technology specifically on populations with AFib or other arrhythmias?
We have not tested this on populations with AFib or other arrhythmias. Anecdotally, what I'll say is we have gone through, well, good Lord, I've seen so many PPG waves in my life, and we do see folks where when you do a Poincare analysis, they clearly have atrial fib. And in that particular case, we've looked to see, can we determine whether or not they have blood pressure? In some cases we can, in other cases we can't. We had one person come to our booth who is a well-known in the field. He's been a speaker and presenter in various areas, and also has a journal and does a lot of things in the media and wearables field and medical media. And he was tested, and we could not get a blood pressure off him to save our lives, at least with our current software. And so we know that there's some cases where people have atrial fib and we just can't do it. We know there's other cases where we can. We have not seen or not looked at atrial fib populations explicitly to see how to solve the issue for those persons. That's another way that we could work with folks who have access to those cohorts. Can we find a way to collect data and then develop our model to solve issues with those particular populations?
Gotcha. I'm trying to go back through the questions and see which ones we have. Here. For the ISO data study, normally requires 85 subjects, 3 data sets each for a total of 255 data sets. In your validation study at 147 subjects, 60% were qualified. How to choose qualified data versus unqualified data without risking cherry picking?
Good. Yeah, I want to be explicit. This was not cherry picked. So we had 255 data sets. The qualifier went through and it picked who it thought would be cuff accurate or not. We did not pick that at all. And that's where that 147, that 60% of data sets came from. It came from those, and of that 255, I can't remember exactly how I broke down, the white paper explains it, but the bottom line is that we didn't cherry pick anything. The qualifier did its job. It was completely automated. We didn't cherry pick anything. And as a matter of fact, I should mention that the qualifier, if we wanted to cherry pick, we'd be hurting ourselves because the qualifier isn't perfect. So it rejects a lot of good data. So a lot of people's data was very accurate, but they were rejected by the qualifier because the qualifier thought that the measurement was not going to be good. So it's really good at saying if the measurement's going to be good. It's not quite as good as saying if the measurement's going to be bad. And so it throws out baby with bathwater, so to speak.
Yep. Well, and we can't have a webinar without a question about blood glucose, so I'll throw this one out there. As your research continues, is it possible to measure blood glucose with this technology?
So I developed an algorithm for blood glucose, and I sold it to Apple for about $1 billion. So it's done. No, I'm kidding. So I tell you, the real story here with glucose is that ValenceCell has looked into this pretty thoroughly, and we've been looking into this for years. As we stand here today, we don't believe there's a good way to truly non-invasively, in a truly wearable way, a way that's not so uncomfortable you just rather freaking prick yourself. We don't believe there's a good way non-invasively today, without a calibration and without a painful, God knows what, waiting however long process to estimate your blood glucose. That we think minimally invasive ways are great ways. They have their troubles too, but we do believe in minimally invasive ways, and invasive ways we do believe that's viable. But we don't see a truly non-invasive, truly wearable, low pain way to do this. However, we do believe it's possible. We do believe this is very possible, and we have data to support it, that you can predict whether or not someone may be about to have a spike or drop in their glucose. And we believe that this is possible based off the technologies that we have today. And we certainly are looking for partners who are interested in exploring that further. And this can be useful because the reality is that you may want to predict ahead of time that someone's about to have a spike or drop, so they can take some kind of action, some kind of intervention, whether it's to test themselves or to go to a professional, or to take a glucose dose if it's going to go too low, or to take an insulin dose if it's going to go too high. But again, we have the internal data to support this, that this is possible. we don't have the data. I would not be comfortable showing you that data today on a population of hundreds of people like for blood pressure.
Got it. And looking back through, we've had several questions and comments coming in around sleep, and wondering if we have done any testing of this technology to try to capture nocturnal dips in blood pressure, or just blood pressure overnight during sleep.
Not intentionally. We have not done that intentionally. Accidentally, we had someone who did a longitudinal measurement wearing a data collector from us, and we saw that was the case. So it's on one person, so I would not put any credence into that at all. My best guess is that you would see this just fine. I mean, we are able to track continuously quite well, unless there's a whole bunch of motion going on, and we can sense that and stop the measurement. So during sleep, we would anticipate you would be able to see these dips. We would certainly anticipate that, and that's one thing you could do with this kit. You can take this kit and you could go ahead and put it on folks and in various ways to see, can you see that dip in sleep, and if maybe that's very useful for your use case.
We've had several questions come in about our machine learning features that we're using. I wanted to throw it out there because we've had several questions and comments come in, but not sure how much we can share about that. So I'll leave that to you, LaBeouf.
What's the question? I'm sorry, I don't think I understand.
Question around our use of machine learning techniques and the features we're using in our model.
Oh yeah, so I'll say that we have filed a patent on so we filed a patent application in 2014, and we still use at least those methodologies today. We've additionally developed additional methodologies, which we filed additional patents on, and our practice is that we explain how to do everything in the patents, and we require you to read it. We're not going to tell you anything extra. So that's all there. Anything that we learn in the future that we feel is something that we can share, we will. But because of the sensitivity of this in the marketplace and the fact that we've had to enforce our patents before, we'll leave it to just the patents.
Gotcha. Well, we are way over time at this point, and I think we have covered the vast majority of the questions. My apologies if we didn't get to your question specifically, but please do feel free to reach out to us at info@ValenceCell.com, or LaBeouf, I think there may be one other slide with our contact information, specifically if you've got questions and want to reach out to us directly. A lot of thanks coming in from attendees for the webinar and the information shared, and so I'll just say thank you to everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us here today. We will be sending out the recording and the slides, and also the link to the white paper as requested earlier. So please do share that with anyone you think might be interested. And reach out to us if you have other questions or would like to discuss this further.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, let me close by saying again, thanking folks. We are eager to find partners to get this in the marketplace. We know we have something big. We know it's very different from anything else that's out there. There've been a lot of reports from folks of things similar to this, and then when people test them, they just don't work as advertised. And what we're finding from folks who've evaluated this dev kit so far is that it's working as advertised. So that makes me feel really good. I want to say that a lot of the questions that were brought up today showcase the limits of what we can do at ValenceCell. For example, the question about sleep monitoring. You might say, well, Jesus, ValenceCell, why don't you just go ahead and do that test? Well, we're 40-something people here at ValenceCell, and we're focusing on a technology that's groundbreaking. We can't do those things ourselves. So finding partners who want to take it and move it that way, that's the kind of thing that'll help really get this out there in various ways. We want to help you be successful using our technology for use cases you feel are important. And then we realize there's only so much we can do. And so that's why we're such a partnership-driven company.
Absolutely. Yep. We look forward to working with our partners on it. So,
all right.
Thanks again, everyone. Thank you, LaBeouf. Great job as usual.
All right.
And everyone have a great day. Stay healthy out there.
That's right.
Thanks again.
Y'all have a good one now. Bye.